I'm Donald McKillop. I have the honor of being the partner of Lois's son, Andy. Luckily for me, there was an added wonderful bonus being Andy's partner, and that is I got to be one of Lois's sons-in-law. Because I know that Lois is here with us in every one of our hearts, I'm going to speak to her as well as about her. Lois, when I first came to Lincoln to face the scrutiny of potential in-laws, and having seen the Hansons perform, you can imagine I was quaking in my boots. I was really nervous. But you, Lois, made sure I felt comfortable, welcome, and accepted. Your obvious pleasure in meeting me and getting to know me made me sure I would pass inspection and get to keep Andy. When you first came to our house in California, you began showing me what it means to be on the receiving end with a loving parent. Your enthusiastic validation of Andy and me as gay men and a gay couple is more important than even Lois you can imagine. Until you, I have never been with someone who's able to give such motherly nurturance and at the same time be such a wonderful friend. You have the knack of really knowing someone, faults and all, and yet still loving them completely. The hugely positive effect of this ability shows up clearly in your wonderful children and your wonderful grandchildren. A woman friend we recently met in California said to Andy, "I knew when I first met you that you came from love." And I think that really says a lot about Lois. Lois, you have many talents in your different roles, but I'm here to tell you, you have the mom thing nailed. A perfect 10. I think that's the highest you can go. You could also be a tease and be silly. When Topher invited me to a Cornhuskers football game, which I realized his wife had made a major sacrifice so I could have the ticket, you, Lois, had great fun offering me your lavender-colored long johns with lace on the sleeve. My choice seemed to be I could die of cold or I could die of humiliation. I never even told Topher what I had underneath all my red Huskers outfit. I chose to be warm, but I so prayed we wouldn't have an accident. A favorite memory of you, Lois, is your big smile and bouncing excitement as you and Andy and two friends from Lincoln entertained us by singing the Nebraska State song at the tops of your lungs. Then you did it again. And then you did it again. She liked that. 3 is correct. You were a fabulous choir director and cheerleader. We loved having the parties to honor you each time you visited California. There were so many longtime friends in your Western extended family who wanted to visit with you. Andy's best friend, Eleanor, can't be here, but wrote something for me to say. Lois was sharp, funny, candid, salty, and sweet. For some of us, she was the mother or sister we didn't have. She was a welcome and trusted confidant. Lois was beautiful and smart and interesting and engaging. And somehow when you sat next to her, it rubbed off on you. That's why we fought about who got to sit next to Lois at the table. I need to add something to that. Lois, you may not know it, but even folks who met you at our house for the first time, like my son and daughter-in-law, were able to see your kindness, your strength, and compassion from just one meeting, and they still have clear, positive memories of you. You once told me how important it is to you to make a difference in people's lives. And like Andy, I was sort of didn't get it when you said you had some doubts. But anyway, Lois, let me remind you of what I said then. For me, you continue to have a most enormous, profound, positive, and healing impact on my life. And I know from others the same is true for them. During your last weeks in March and April, I loved our late night phone calls to tuck you into bed. It's very tough now not to be able to call you and share some event or experience. We're constantly saying, we've got to tell Lois about this. It's especially hard for Andy because, like Topher, he had amazing hours-long marathon phone calls. These were high points for Andy. I know, Lois, that you know how deeply Andy loved you and still loves you. As for me, please remember what I told you often. I totally love and totally adore you, and always will. I'm not going to say goodbye here, Lois. I can always be with you whenever I look at Andy, or when I look into my own heart. I am so grateful to have you in my life.
My earliest recollection of Lois is of her sitting amongst a circle of people in this church's gathering place, presiding over the search committee for a new director of religious education. To be honest, I didn't really believe I had what it takes to be a religious educator, and I was rather terrified at the thought of being interviewed. But in that initial conversation, Lois made me believe that I already had everything I needed to excel at the work. As she drew out my story, I found myself relaxing and finding out that, why, yes, I really did know what I was talking about, as she helped me to articulate my vision. That first interaction has come to epitomize how I think of Lois in general. Lois had a gift for welcoming people into the circle, compassionately drawing them into dialogue, helping them to lift up their best selves. She'd get you talking, and then she would truly listen. We're hearing this over and over again. She was genuinely interested in the individual and their way of being in the world, and so very validating. Later, as I got to know her, I would marvel at that, how present Lois could be, whether in a one-on-one conversation or a large group dialogue, as if that time and these people were really all she had to think about, while at the same time quietly impressing upon you her well-informed worldview and understandings. I had no idea then how big this tiny woman truly was. Soon after I got the job, my kids and I came to live with Alan and Lois for several months following my divorce. We didn't really know them at the time. I bet that doesn't surprise many of you here, that these two big-hearted people would invite a single mom and her two quite young children into their lives for a season. It shocked the hell out of me. We were in the fireplace room there, and Alan had heard I was in a tough situation in conversation during coffee hour. And Lois wandered our way, and Alan turned to her and said, "Honey, Beryl and the kids are going to come live with us this summer, okay?" And without missing a beat, Lois said, "Of course, when will you arrive?" With no family other than my children in Lincoln, the Hansons became my chosen family. And Lois and I would joke that she was my other mother. Here's the thing though, Lois wasn't a rescuer. She was an empowerer. Let it be said that being in relationship with Lois meant a constant call to action. Because if you were in a relationship with Lois Hanson, you felt passionately about something, there was just no excuse not to put in the effort. I do want to mention that 8 years ago or so, Lois adopted another lost soul into her family, a cat that she named Kitty. Although at some time he was called Potato too, I remember. Kitty brought out a playful and doting side of Lois that I just adored. I loved how she delighted in him and how entertained she was by his antics. Last year, she was regaling my son Danny and me with a story about a mean cat that had been intimidating Kitty through her patio door. "How did you know he was mean?" I asked her. "He just looked mean," she said. And Danny said, "So what does a mean cat look like?" And Loie didn't miss a beat. She said, "Like this." And then she snorted with laughter and she said, "Oh God, I'm turning into one of those crazy cat ladies." I am happy to tell you that Kitty continues to delight and is happily living in my home in Milwaukee, where he has no window dialogues with mean neighborhood cats. She may have been crazy for Kitty, but Lois was a people person to her core, especially when it came to her family. She was so proud of her children and her grandchildren, and they were often the focus of her stories when we spoke. Her circle of influence, though, was ever expansive, and she included my children, among others, in her embrace. When Darren, my daughter's fiance, was planning to propose to Chelsea, he asked Lois for help in hiding a key element, which was an 8-foot-tall iron hoopah, which she offered her garage to. And Lois was absolutely giddy to be part of the intrigue and happily conspiring in the secret. It was just last June, just a year ago, that Lois was a keynote speaker at the Compassionate Choices Conference in Chicago. Less than a year. And I accompanied her to that. She transfixed the plenary audience, telling the story of her journey with Alan when he died, in an address that had people in tears. She was such a rock star that day, passionate and funny and poignant, a teacher through and through. Loie knew how to get her point across, and she did so with a natural grace. Whether it was talking to the person across the table or addressing a crowd of 500. When asked why she was speaking out, Lois said this. She said, "Honest discussion about death and dying is deeply buried in the conversational closet, making it difficult to consider our wishes and make end-of-life plans." And if you knew Lois at all, you knew that she believed closets were for things and not for people. She used stories to connect, to express her values, to make her point, and to share her insights. In honor of that storyteller and how she inspired that in me, I'd like to leave you with the story of our last conversation. I'd come to Lincoln the week prior to her death to share in her final days. And Lois was all shiny and basking in the love, even though it was clear that she was ready for the end. She told me that she didn't see herself as courageous, but she did see herself as dignified. She was deeply moved and somewhat surprised in recalling a conversation that she had with some young people, she said. I said, "Young people?" She said, "You know, your age." Young people in California who had called to tell her what an impact they had had on her life, on their lives. And I told her at that time that I believe those connections to be tangible things, a discernible energy that if I closed my eyes, I could see as a tapestry of delicate silver threads woven across the patterns of relationship. Well, I'm not sure she bought into that, but she did indulge me in that vision for a moment. And then she told me that she loved me, and she said she was so glad that I had come into her life. And when I left her that day, I thought that I had said everything, that this was good, it was a good time to leave, and that I was ready to go home to Wisconsin. But as I was driving home to Wisconsin, I realized that I hadn't actually told her that I'll miss her. And it became imminently important to me to tell her that I would miss her. And so the next morning I called her up and I told her those words, and she said, "Oh, Beryl, you've been telling me that for the past week. You just said it in different words." And then she went on to say, "When you are missing me too much and you think you can't stand it, just stop and take a deep breath and listen to your heart. You'll hear my voice there." Actually, while I was writing this tribute, I did just that. I stopped and I took a deep breath and I said, "Geez, Loie, what can I possibly say that would do justice to you?" And I heard her voice, clear as day, saying, "Sorry, Beryl, some things you just have to figure out yourself." It was her. Thomas Campbell wrote, "To live in the hearts we leave behind is not to die." A long life to you, Loie. I miss you.
Gentle matriarch, supportive mentor, generous friend, challenging teacher. These are descriptions of Lois that come to mind as I contemplate the many things she was to me and to so many in this church. A matriarch is an older woman who is powerful within a family organization, a highly respected person. I can think of few leadership positions within this congregation that Lois did not fill over the years. She was director of religious education, board president, ministerial search committee, and dream team member, just to name a few. Each time she was sought out because of her wisdom and her quiet but commanding presence. I drew close to Lois as a member of the worship committee during the interim period between the Charles Stevens and Fritz Hudson ministries, a challenging time. She helped me grow into the role of worship leader and continued to be a supportive cheering section for my efforts. I know that she mentored many who are here today, influencing our lives in such positive ways. Knowing that we would find both acceptance and challenge, we sought out her advice in rocky times and were helped to find our balance. Lois and Al Shudded and I shared many meals together. They were the most pleasant of times. I particularly treasure the lunches Lois and I shared at the Nature Center when she would spirit me away from my office to some lovely spot for a chat. However, I most value her role as teacher. My knowledge of Lois in the classroom is only hearsay, but she had the ability to discern issues before their time and lead the way to effective action. Her persistent efforts to educate our community about LGBTA issues and help guide, perhaps even drag our church into becoming a welcoming congregation was also before my time. But I have had the good fortune to be challenged by her example and that of Al before her, to recognize that we have choices about the way we end our lives as well as the way we live them, and that these choices can provide meaningful, peaceful, joyful times to share memory and gratitude. I close with a passage from a poem by Mary Oliver titled At the River Clarion. Of course, for each of us, there is the daily life. Let us live it, gesture by gesture. When we cut the ripe melon, should we not give it thanks? And should we not thank the knife also? We do not live in a simple world. There was someone I loved who grew old and ill. One by one, I watched the fires go out. There was nothing I could do except to remember that we receive and then give back. With deep gratitude, I acknowledge the gifts that I and so many of us have received from Lois. It remains for us to give back.
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Funk, and I'm really very honored to be able to speak today about Lois and to be among all of you. This tribute has just been wonderful, and so much of what has been said absolutely reflects my experience with her too, in so many ways. I've been really fortunate to know Lois, to work with her, and sometimes be a co-conspirator with her for over 30 years. And I want to touch on just a few areas where I knew her best, but I also want to share something that I learned just the other day that I think is so Lois. When Lois moved to Lincoln in 1966 with her family, she joined a group called the Panel of American Women. I've never heard of them. Known in some circles as the Bigotry Squad. And this was a group of racially and religiously diverse women who went all around the country, speaking as a panel about their experiences with prejudice. And they usually started their talks with, you know, I'm just an ordinary housewife, but here's my experience with prejudice. And Lois served as a moderator. And Marcia Kushner, who was a member of the group and who shared this story with me, said that Lois's clear thinking and ability to reach out and help people access and understand their message was extremely valuable to their work. And you know, I think that ability to help people access new information and ideas was really a signature of her work throughout her life as an educator, a counselor, and as an activist. Now, I got to know Lois through our mutual interest and work on equality issues for women. But I really got to know her well after I went to work at Planned Parenthood in 1987, the same year that she received the YWCA's Tribute to Women Award, and one of many awards that she would receive during her life. Lois was one of the strongest supporters for comprehensive, age-appropriate, and medically accurate sex education you could find. You know, she taught continuing ed for other teachers in sex education, and she wrote The Dick and Jane Dilemma. It was a curriculum about sex role stereotyping, and it was used by the Lincoln Public Schools and adopted by the State Board of Education, which is pretty remarkable. Not surprisingly, of course, she made sex education a regular part of the curriculum in her psychology classes at Lincoln East. And she even looked for teachable moments, she called them, related to sexuality in literature in her English classes. Planned Parenthood of Lincoln had a very well-respected sex education program, and unlike many Planned Parenthood affiliates around the country, our educators were actually welcomed into the Lincoln Public Schools, and that was thanks in part to Lois. She regularly invited Planned Parenthood educators into her classroom, and one of the things that was so unique about her was that if the educators wanted to show a film, she would make sure the class saw it the day before, so that the educators, when they came in, had the entire class period to talk with the students about the material. I mean, that was unheard of in sex education. Susan Powers Alexander, who was the director of education and spent many hours in Lois's classrooms, said that Lois conveyed to students how wonderful it was to have children. And I think we can appreciate what's been said today of how true that was for her. And she spoke very personally about her children, how proud she was of them. She talked about them, what they did. And Susan said it made an environment that was very safe for students to talk and ask questions. She made things personal, and she shared herself. She opened up. She also, of course, stressed that timing was very important and that you had to be ready to be a parent. But she really made everybody comfortable. It was safe in Lois's class to talk and to ask questions. Because, of course, her outstanding work in sex education, Planned Parenthood gave her the first Sex Educator of the Year award. And that was in '88. And a few years later, in '91, she joined the board of directors, and we were very happy to have her. And, of course, she became immediately the chair of the education committee. And then she became the vice chair, and then she became the board president. And she came on at a time when we had been planning to provide abortion services, and we've been struggling with various issues about getting there. But when she became president, we knew we were really ready to move. And so she was just an extraordinary person to come on at that time. As you can imagine, it was a very challenging period, to say the least. None of us had ever done anything like this before. A huge, for us, $1.2 million capital campaign. We purchased and renovating a surgical clinic, actually developing surgical abortion services. And this was within an atmosphere of extreme hostility, to say the least. There was a real threat of violence around us. And our community relations were particularly important. And Lois would present Planned Parenthood as an intelligent, rational, and compassionate organization working to fulfill its mission. And she projected that, and she made people see that. And we had hundreds of meetings, it felt like. And Lois was very present, and it's been talked about. She had